We welcome you to the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. Today we have a briefing on one of the new initiatives of the State Fiscal Service, and I give the floor to Roman Nasirov, who is the head of the State Fiscal Service. He'll announce the initiative. Good morning, dear journalists, dear colleagues. Today we have for you, I'd say, a new positive news. Another positive news. The State Fiscal Service introduces a new institute of the representative on entrepreneurial issues, or business ombudsman. This is our initiative. We worked on this for 5 or 6 weeks in order to deepen our real dialogue with the business, with taxpayers. I'd like to stress that this is going to be another tool of communication on proposals, suggestions, sometimes complaints that the State Fiscal Service gets. And this very responsible position is filled by the former Vice President of the American Chamber of Commerce Chamber, Taras Kachka, who is now one of the managers of the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, a man whom you know very well, who's been working with taxpayers for quite long. He's been defending their interests, a person with whom both the State Fiscal Service and the Ministry of Finance worked, a person who took part in the preparatory work for the tax reform that the Ministry of Finance is now working on. And I think that from this day, from this month, we will talk and hear taxpayers even deeper, and they will understand and hear us. So the floor goes to Taras Kachka. Hello. Hello. I am in an additional capacity now, as I will continue to work at the Ukrainian Media Center of Reforms, and this institution has entrusted me to work on public basis, as the main idea is in strengthening the direction of work on transforming the State Fiscal Service from the control body to the service. And it's very important to underline that this is the initiative of the State Fiscal Service emanating from within. We're not talking only about an additional tool to consider different addresses by taxpayers about the activity of the State Fiscal Service. We're talking about the strengthening of the work within the State Fiscal Service and the consideration of the problems that the business raises, as now there's quite a lot of channels of filing complaints, there's a lot of dialogue with business associations, and there's also the Council of Business Ombudsman in Ukraine and the Council of Entrepreneurs at the Cabinet of Ministers, and there's legislation on citizens' addresses. This is not a huge problem to file a complaint. A bigger problem is to transform a problem issue and find some mechanism of its solution. So the way is such technical and probably boring work on to regulate the income tax. This is a problem that haunts us from the past. We have to transform some normative acts into technical means and tools, and this is one of the examples that explains the mechanics of the work of this institution. This is more about finding some specific tools to solve specific issues. Of course, there will be an additional channel of communication that will provide a direct opportunity to address myself, the ombudsman, by phone or by email. We are working on these technical issues. We have reserved August for us to work on procedural issues. However, in principle, the problems that the Fiscal Service works on with business is well known to me and to you all. So I think that the main task is to find solution for some practical problems that there are, and it is understood that hardly the introduction of this service is a mechanism of solving issues in itself. This is an additional tool that will help find these solutions. And so we are now actively entering the active stage of tax reform, and the radical character of the reform will be in the change of administering the taxes, and this applies both to the level of legislation and of everyday work. So this is important for the everyday work on draft laws for the Parliament, and the institutional reform of the State Fiscal Service, which in fact has already started and develops in the cooperation with international organizations. So the directions are rather positive, and the main thing is not administrative decisions, but the general tuning of all the mechanism of the fiscal service and the change of the culture of communication with the entrepreneurs. I hope I will be instrumental in transforming this into reality. Thank you, Taras, for your preparedness to perform such a important and complicated work. Any questions? Please, please.
Will your work be duplicating the work of the business ombudsman Shemeta, whose office has been already created? It will not be duplicating this work. We have the issues of the fiscal service, and it's related to taxpayers. All these issues are not just limited to complaints. There are many proposals, many new constructive ways. There are many issues from payment of the profit tax, VAT, to some issues submitted or some questions submitted by some business associations or companies as proposals on improvements, on improving of electronic service. For fiscal service, it is very important. We have no time to wait. We have no opportunity to hope that someone else will do it. We want to launch the process, and we believe that this process will also be very much compatible with what the ombudsman and the cabinet of ministers doing. But there will be a very good channel of communication between fiscal service and all the entrepreneurs. In reality, what I was talking about, the Council of Entrepreneurs, Business Associations, Council of Ombudsman, European Business Association, American Chamber of Commerce, Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce, they continue to work. The idea is not to replace them, not to create competition, but to help, because that is the initiative coming up out of the fiscal service. If the business ombudsman sends some request, and we see that it is needed to not just satisfy some individual complaint, but to do something more comprehensive, then we all together will be able to develop the action plan and to implement it. I was basically working with all the business associations, and the idea is to strengthen the efficiency of the dialogue which is taking place. The efficiency is of importance, and we need to intensify, to coordinate this dialogue. Very often people ask if there's answer to one businessman so that we can spread this answer to others. Also transparency of our work, improvement of dialogue. To ask a question is one thing, but to get an answer is much more. Kiryushka Igor, public activist, you were saying that electronic excise tax, stamp will be introduced. Are you planning to continue this project, or are you looking at the possibility to have the program, the online cash apparatus. We are starting the first pilot project on the excise stamp in August, and very soon we will develop proposals as to some amendments to the legislation so that the electronic excise stamp can really function. The further fiscalization is another issue that we've been emphasizing many times. I can repeat it again. We'll be moving in the direction so that the fiscal service is providing services on acquiring. And here we expect to receive many proposals from business that we will be receiving directly or via the commissioner. The microphone is not used. We are planning to do the whole cycle. The fiscal service will give permit for issuing of the excise stamp, and making it all electronic is one of the most required or demanded ways of improving the business. Electronic instruments and automated processes, that is what business is asking for, because they believe that's the simplest way to overcome corruption. There are many factors. It will improve processes, it will speed up processes. We are removing the human factor, and we are moving in the direction of other European countries, NTN TV channel. In mass media, it has been mentioned that the Ministry of Agricultural Policy and the Ministry of Infrastructure, they are paying some additional money. I'm sorry, what surcharge, what additional payments to salaries? Will fiscal service be inspecting that? I don't want to say that that is the first time I hear that, but at least I hear that for the first time like that. I believe that's important information. We will check it if we see the facts of that, whether we see the facts of that, and this will be, if this is the case, this will be important for us and for other law enforcement bodies. Any other questions? Uh, 17th channel, what changes in administration can entrepreneurs expect to see? Now the inspections have been cancelled, but what will happen in the future? Administering is very wide issue. Whatever we are doing is administering. We are trying to improve it. We have planned to introduce changes into auditing. We are trying by the end of the year to dramatically reduce the number of out-of-plan inspections, and electronic VAT administering will allow us to do that. Talking about the moratorium on inspections, I believe that we saw some bad examples, the examples related to the fire at the gas station in Vasilkov and some others, and so it is important to find the correct balance, where we are inspecting, how we are inspecting, so that the inspection for taxpayers is not some pressure, so that it is the normal procedure which they are looking for, and they will have no questions. And also we need to remind you about the law signed by the President on simplification of administering. That's about the documents which are to be submitted. We need to understand when we are talking about administering, we're always talking about regulating some small elements in a very big chain of communication. And one of the very important projects which we had, this will be included into the law that was signed last week, which does not introduce any radical improvement, but number of small procedural improvements in administering, especially during inspections, are welcomed by business. And that is a great example of how the requests from business. Business was talking a lot about how the inspections are being conducted. Then that was reflected in the tax draft law, and now we encourage, we will be writing about what has changed in administering after the law has been approved. Daniel?
Farid Gusseinov, Social Ukraine TV channel. And what are the issues that entrepreneurs should address you about, and what leverage do you have to solve the issues? Well, in principle, there are three categories of issues that entrepreneurs should contact me about. It's maybe an individual complaint, and this is understood that this is probably the simplest, but also the most complicated issue, because administrative complaints and court complaints are there. So we are not going to be a substitute, but we'll see how these problems can be regulated. Another block of issues is so-called systemic issues that pertain to taxation, like for instance the tax on income tax, when the problem wasn't being amassed over years because the legislation was not changed. So we have some need to create a action plan. And also third block is the discussion on tax administration and tax changes. Now the discussion is rather inclusive. Everybody can launch and file their proposals, and we've been listening to a lot of them, especially in the last 3 or 4 months. None of them was repelled or rejected. All of them will be a subject of my activity. The other thing is that in any case, this will not substitute for normal procedures like adopting departmental orders and all this, and also the procedure to consider individual complaints. This is not the creation of a super institution that will replace other mechanisms. This is just another additional auxiliary instrument. You should not think that there will be a phone line that you will call and solve all the issues. The problem is that there's a lot of problems amassed, and my mission is to their solution. The great issue is to systematize and coordinate the dialogue that does exist on all directions, from suggestions and proposals to complaints between entrepreneurs and State Fiscal Service. Hello, Denis Osmolovsky, public activist. Could you please tell me, in most cases, the Fiscal Service is still regulated by internal orders from 2010 and 2011, and will your zone of responsibility and research include those orders that are not registered in the Ministry of Justice but are used by the State Fiscal Service, as a result of which there's incorrect administration, administering of taxes? Let me answer this. This is our initiative, so that questions like these and issues like these are solved not only within the State Fiscal Service, and so that they cease to become an indication of closeness, so that we make a first step and say we are open, we are ready to listen to your suggestions, we are ready to work in transparent relations with the taxpayers. I'd like to add that, in fact, there are no secret orders, and the business rather quickly gets to know about all those internal documents. Well, number 110, to tell you bluntly, is that we have several business organizations that have been stressing the problems with these orders, so we can also say that they are within our sights and we will look into them. So I think that the status of the order is probably not very pleasant when we talk about the orders that are not registered by the Ministry of Justice. But if we talk about the essence of these normative acts, then they've been always a subject of discussion. I remember, for instance, within the framework of the Investment Council at the State Fiscal Service, we talked about the problems of Order 110, so I don't see any problem why we don't look into these issues. Of course, they will be within the circle of issues that we will consider, but the circle of issues is very broad, very wide, starting from the issues that you raise and up to the Investment Council and the Public Council. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, the briefing time is ending. I think there's a lot of questions to Mr. Nasirov, so I invite you to talk outside of the hall, and our next briefing is within 2 or 3 minutes.